Nobody wanted them anymore. Their racing days were over, and they had nowhere to go. She said, "Bring them here." 60 retired racehorses, ribs showing through dull coats, legs that had earned millions and now meant nothing to anyone. Everyone told her to sell. The county man smiled and said she'd be it. Ellie Marsden pressed her palms flat against the kitchen table and stared at the open journal. The brass cap on its leather spine caught the overhead bulb, throwing a coin of light across the opposite wall. Her grandfather's handwriting filled the page in slanted blue ink, the letters tight and deliberate, the way a man writes when he knows no one else will read it, but means every word anyway. She traced the line with her fingertip. The animal doesn't owe you anything. You owe the animal a reason to stay. Dale Marsden had been dead since February, 53 days now. The funeral had been small, 6 people in a Baptist church that seated 120, the minister mispronouncing Dale's middle name, and afterward a silence so total it felt like the county had already forgotten him. He left Ellie 140 acres of marginal pasture land outside Harrodsburg, Kentucky. That sounds like something. It wasn't. The hayfields had gone fallow 3 seasons back. The barn sagged on its eastern wall where a support beam had cracked and nobody'd replaced it. 1,100 feet of fence was rotting from the posts up, the wire rusting in loose curls against the grass. No active operation, no livestock, no income. And in a savings account at the Mercer County Credit Union, exactly $4,200 to her name. She was 24 years old. Gray-green eyes, deep set under straight brows, dark chestnut hair pulled back in a low, loose ponytail, flyaway strands along her temples catching the kitchen light. A faint scattering of freckles across the bridge of her nose, slim and wiry, the kind of build you get from carrying things instead of lifting weights. She wore the olive-green canvas work jacket even indoors because the furnace hadn't worked right since January, and in its inner pocket, the journal's twin, the one she'd been carrying since the day after the funeral, reading a few pages each night the way some people read scripture. Dale had believed something the neighbors considered pure lunacy. He'd written about it for years, page after page of observations about retired workhorses. Not theory. He'd watched them. He'd watched how they grazed in slow rotational patterns, never stripping a section bare the way cattle did. How their manure broke down differently, seeding the soil with a microbial profile that compacted earth couldn't generate on its own. How their hooves, heavier than a cow's but distributed across a different strike pattern, actually punched aeration holes into hard-pan clay when they moved across slopes. He believed, wrote it down in plain language with hand-drawn diagrams, that a herd of retired horses, managed correctly across subdivided pastures, could reverse decades of compaction and erosion caused by chemical monocropping. The neighbors thought he was out of his mind, a sweet old fool with a toolbox and a theory. He died before he could run the experiment. So it fell to Ellie. The call came on a Tuesday. A contact at a Lexington racetrack, a groom named Paul she'd met once through Dale, told her 8 thoroughbreds with 3 days from a kill auction, ages 6 to 14. Retired from racing, some of them retired from everything. Nobody was bidding. She drove Dale's truck 40 miles north in the dark and borrowed a stock trailer from a neighbor named Wilson, who didn't ask questions because he figured she'd fail quietly enough that it wouldn't matter. She paid $15 a horse, $120 total. She signed the papers on the tailgate of the truck, and the seller looked at her like she'd bought 8 problems shaped like animals. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the very next morning, before those horses even arrived, a man in polished tan loafers stepped out of a county vehicle and walked up Ellie's gravel drive like he owned the place. Craig Fenwick, County Agricultural Extension Agent. Sandy blonde hair parted neatly on the left, trimmed short above the ears. A pressed light blue Oxford shirt tucked into khaki slacks, 2 pens in the breast pocket, and a beige clipboard held against his hip. The faint birthmark on the right side of his neck sat just above his collar line, like a stamp. He had the posture of a man who'd practiced standing straight in a mirror, and the smile of someone who believed patience was the same thing as kindness. He called it a courtesy visit, sat on the porch without being invited, and spread a folder of brochures across the railing. The county's model for struggling farms, he explained. 3 options, each one a different flavor of surrender. Lease the acreage to a soybean operation, take the USDA subsidy and let the land sit, or, and here his voice dropped like he was offering her a secret, sell to the developers who'd been circling Mercer County like vultures in pressed slacks. You know how some people can make generosity sound like a threat? That was Craig Fenwick. He looked at Ellie's sagging barn, her rotting fence, her empty pasture, and he said, with that little dimple showing on his left cheek, "Sweetheart, I've seen plenty of young people try to hold on to places like this out of sentiment. Sentiment doesn't fix a fence line. You're in over your head, and the smart move is to admit it before it gets embarrassing." Ellie set the folder of brochures on the porch rail. She didn't open it. She looked at him with those gray-green eyes and said, "The farm is not for sale." 4 words. A closed door. Fenwick drove away. The brochures sat on the porch until rain warped them into pulp. The horses arrived that afternoon. And God, they were a mess. Dull coats, not just unbrushed, but mineral deficient, the hair lying flat and lifeless, visible ribs on 6 of the 8, cracked hooves, 2 of them still wearing leg splints from old injuries nobody'd bothered to remove. Ellie walked among them in the barn, running her hands down cannon bones, checking teeth for age and wear. She had no veterinary training. What she had was page 47 of Dale's journal, detailed notes on hoof angles as indicators of skeletal alignment, coat condition as a mineral map, and a recipe for a mineral lick made from limestone dust, blackstrap molasses, and kelp meal. She mixed the first batch that night in a feed bucket, measuring by hand the way Dale's notes described. At dusk, she turned the first 8 horses into the north pasture. She stood at the fence rail, her hands resting on the weathered wood, the journal tucked in her jacket pocket with its brass cap just visible at the opening. The horses walked through the gate. Then 6 of them stopped. Just stopped. Heads low, legs still, clustered at the gate like they didn't believe the space was theirs. The last light drained from the sky in long amber bands across the Kentucky hills, and Ellie watched them stand there, motionless, refusing to move into the open ground. 6 animals who had spent their lives being told where to go, when to run, and how fast. And now, given an open pasture, they had no idea what to do with freedom. She stayed at the fence until full dark, the journal pressed against her ribs through the canvas jacket. Somewhere in its pages, Dale had written the answer. She just hadn't found it yet. 3 weeks in, the horses still cluster at the gate, and the pasture shows no sign of the grazing pattern Dale described in the journal. Every morning, Ellie walks out to the north pasture expecting something different. Every morning, she finds the same scene. 8 animals standing shoulder to shoulder near the fence line, heads low, nostrils pointed toward the barn like they can smell the hay through the walls. The pasture behind them stretches 200 acres of brown, untouched, compacted earth with sparse tufts of fescue so thin you could count the blades. Nobody's grazing. Nobody's moving. These horses don't know what a pasture is for. And that's the problem nobody warned her about. Track horses eat from buckets. Their whole lives, every single day from the time they could stand, somebody brought feed to them. Grain in a rubber tub, hay in a net, water in a trough bolted to a stall wall. They never learned to drop their heads and tear grass from soil. They never learned to walk and chew and walk some more. The instinct is buried so deep under years of institutional feeding that it might as well be gone. So Ellie feeds them. 2 bales a day for 8 horses, broken and scattered near the gate because that's the only place they'll eat. At $3.50 a bale, that's $7 a day, $49 a week, roughly $200 a month. She does the math at the kitchen table with a pencil stub and the back of an envelope. At that rate, the money from Dale's account runs dry in 5 months. 5 months of burning cash to feed animals that are supposed to be feeding the land. She opens the journal. The brass-capped spine catches the kitchen light as she pulls it from her jacket pocket, and she flips to a page near the middle where Dale's handwriting gets tight and careful, the way it always did when he was working through a real problem. The entry is titled, "Teaching a Horse to be a Horse Again." He describes a method, scatter feed in decreasing concentrations across a pasture, starting thick near the familiar spot and thinning out toward the far fence. Force the animal to walk for its food. Gradually reduce the near piles. Make the easy meal disappear so the only option is the distant one, and along the way, the horse's head drops, and it notices the ground. Ellie starts the next morning. Small piles of grain every 30 feet in a line running from the gate toward the north tree line. The first few days, the horses eat the close piles and ignore the rest. Day 4, 2 of them wander to the second pile. Day 7, a cluster of 5 makes it halfway across the field. Day 11, she marks it on the calendar with a pencil X, a 12-year-old bay mare she's been calling Ledger walks the entire line, past the last grain pile, drops her head, and lips at the fescue. Ledger, the first one to remember what she was. But nobody else sees progress. June Harrelson stops by on a Thursday, her steel-gray hair tucked behind her ears, the yellow work gloves stuffed in her back pocket like always. She stands at the fence rail next to Ellie and watches 6 horses clustered near the gate doing absolutely nothing. June doesn't laugh, doesn't say a word. But the silence from a woman like June, sturdy, practical, someone who runs 200 head of cattle on real pasture with real results. That silence lands heavier than any joke. She nods once, pats the fence post like she's consoling it, and walks back to her truck. At the feed store in town, Ellie loads 2 bales into the bed of Dale's old Ford. 2 men by the register don't bother lowering their voices. One says something about the Marsden girl running a horse cemetery. The other one laughs, that short, wet kind of laugh people use when they think someone else's failure is entertainment. Ellie pays for the hay. She doesn't look at them. She doesn't respond. She carries the receipt to the truck, and the receipt goes into the journal, because every dollar matters and every dollar gets tracked. Then Craig Fenwick shows up again. Of course he does. That pressed blue Oxford, those polished loafers that have never once touched actual soil, that beige clipboard tucked against his hip like a weapon. This time, he's got a soil test. He stands in the north pasture with his clean shoes and reads the number out loud like he's delivering a diagnosis to a terminal patient. 0.4% organic matter. He pauses to let that sink in. The county average, he says, is 2.1%. He smiles, that small, patient, dimpled smile, and tells her the soil is effectively dead. Then he tilts his chin up, just slightly, the way he always does when he's about to offer her something she didn't ask for. You might want to consider the soybean lease before winter, Eleanor. No shame in it. Some land just isn't meant for what you're trying. Some land just isn't meant for it. Like the land decided. Like the dirt made a choice. Ellie says nothing. Fenwick leaves his brochure folder on the porch railing. That night, rain hits the tin roof in sheets. Ellie sits at the kitchen table with the numbers spread out in front of her. Feed costs, fence repair, farrier bills for 8 horses whose hooves are cracked and overgrown from years of standing on concrete. The total is ugly. The trajectory is worse. She picks up the brochure folder Fenwick left, opens it. Glossy photos of soybean fields, projected yields, a lease agreement with blanks where her signature would go. She stares at it for a long time. Then she opens the journal to a dog-eared page near the back where Dale's handwriting is slower, shakier, written in the last years of his life. Waste is just a system the world hasn't finished building. She closes the brochure folder, walks to the wood stove, opens the iron door, sets the folder on the coals, and watches the glossy pages curl and blacken. 6 weeks in, the horses are grazing on their own, all 8 of them spread across the north pasture in a loose scatter, heads down, moving slowly the way horses are supposed to move. Their hooves, still rough, still healing, are punching through the compacted topsoil with every step, breaking the hard crust that's kept water and air from reaching the roots below. Their manure drops where they stand, composting in place under the autumn sun, dark circles of nitrogen sinking into ground that hasn't been fed in years. Ellie finds the first patch of clover regenerating in the hoof-disturbed soil of the north pasture, a 6-foot circle of green in a field of brown, and kneels to press her fingers into the dirt, which crumbles dark and moist instead of pale and hard. Word gets around the track circuit that there's a woman in Harrodsburg taking horses nobody wants, and the calls start coming. 2 a week, then 5. It starts with the grooms. They're the ones who actually care, right? The trainers move on to the next prospect. The owners never touched the animal in the first place, but the grooms, they remember every name. They talk at diners off Versailles Road, at the tack shops along Ironworks Pike, in the parking lots after morning workouts at Keeneland. They say there's this woman out in Mercer County, Dale Marsden's granddaughter. She took that mare Ledger, and the horse looks like a different animal. They say she doesn't charge. They say she doesn't ask questions about what happened at the track. So the phone rings. A trainer outside of Frankfurt has a 5-year-old with a bowed tendon. Nobody's putting money into surgery. Can she take him? She says yes. A jockey's wife in Midway calls about 2 mares pulled from a claiming race, both underweight, one with rain rot so bad the hair's sloughing off in patches. Can she take them? She says yes. A hauler passing through on his way to a kill pen in Ohio has 3 geldings in back he'll drop off for free if she's got room. She says yes to all of them. By October of that first year, Ellie Marsden has 34 horses on 140 acres of land that most of Mercer County still considers a write-off. And she's building fence to hold them, not with lumber from the co-op, not with that white PVC board fencing you see on the Lexington show farms. She's cutting cedar posts from the back woodlot herself, a chainsaw and a draw knife, bark stripped in long curling ribbons, the pale heartwood underneath smelling sharp and clean as medicine. $0 in materials. Split rail where it'll hold, wire braced where the young ones test it. Every post set by hand with a post hole digger, her shoulders burning, her gray-green eyes narrowed against the dust, that brass-capped journal riding in the inner pocket of her olive canvas jacket because she keeps stopping to check Dale's fencing diagrams. Here's what she builds from those diagrams and her own hard observation. A 90-day intake protocol. Not a guess, a system. Weeks 1 and 2, stall rest. The horse doesn't leave its box. She trims hooves that haven't been properly trimmed in months, sometimes years. She hangs mineral licks and watches which ones the horses choose first, Copper-heavy or salt-heavy tells her what the body's missing. She doesn't rush this. The track taught these animals that every new space means new pain, so she lets them stand still. Weeks 3 through 6, small paddock. Quarter-acre pens where she scatters feed in wide arcs across the ground instead of dumping it in a trough. Forces them to walk, to lower their heads, to forage like the grazing animals they were born to be instead of the machines the industry made them. Their necks start to relax. Their eyes soften. Weeks 7 through 12, full pasture integration. And this is where she discovers something Dale's notes hinted at but never proved. The track horses calm fastest when paired with an older horse that's already been through the program. Ledger, that first mare, the one with the scarred knees, becomes the herd's anchor. Ellie turns a new horse out with Ledger and watches from the fence rail, hands resting on the top board, and every single time it's the same. The new horse paces, frets, pins its ears. Ledger walks over, stands parallel, drops her head, and grazes. Within 40 minutes, the new horse mirrors her, drops its head, eats. Calm is contagious. Dale wrote that in his journal, page 47, underlined twice. And the land responds to the horses the way the horses respond to Ledger. 34 animals rotating across those 140 acres in a pattern Ellie designs from Dale's rotational grazing notes. Never more than 4 days on the same section, hooves breaking the crust, manure dropping in scattered pats instead of concentrated lots. She takes her own soil samples with a hand auger she finds in Dale's green metal toolbox with the brass clasp, drives the tube down 8 inches, bags the cores, sends them to the extension lab in Lexington. The North pasture reads 0.9% organic matter, up from 0.4 in 8 months. That number might not mean anything to you, but it meant everything to her. The grass is thicker. The clover, that same clover she knelt over in a 6-foot circle, is spreading in patches across 3 pastures now. Fields that produced nothing a year ago are yielding 1.4 bales of hay per acre. Not enough, not yet. But something from nothing is still a miracle. Because the money is a disaster. 34 horses eat. They eat a lot. Hay, mineral supplements, the farrier every 8 weeks at $35 a head. She's burning through $800 a month she does not have. Her solution is pure stubbornness stacked 3 ways. She barters farrier work, trimming his personal horses for free in exchange for reduced rates on hers. She adds 30 chickens to the operation and sells eggs at the Harrodsburg Farmers Market, $4 a dozen every Saturday. And she takes a weekend job at the Tractor Supply in Danville, 20 miles each way, standing on concrete for 8 hours, ringing up fence staples and salt blocks for the same neighbors who think she's lost her mind. She does not take a loan. She does not call Craig Fenwick. Then, in November, a silver Buick pulls down the gravel drive. A woman named Patricia Waverly steps out, mid-50s, dressed like she came from a luncheon in Lexington, which she did. Her husband trained one of the horses Ellie took in, a gray gelding named Dividend, 7 years old, washed out of allowance company with bone chips in both knees. Patricia expected what everyone expects: a muddy pen, a skinny horse, a sad little charity operation held together with baling twine and guilt. Instead, she sees Dividend grazing on green pasture in November, coat glossy, moving freely across the slope without a hitch in his stride, head low, calm. Patricia Waverly stands at that cedar fence and starts crying. She doesn't explain why, and Ellie doesn't ask. After a long minute, Patricia says, "Can I come back?" Ellie nods once. That night, that very night, Ellie stands in the barn at midnight with 34 horses on the property, a lantern hung from a nail, writing in her own notebook for the first time. Not Dale's journal, but a new one, calculating that she needs $800 a month she doesn't have, and the system isn't ready to earn yet. Patricia Waverly comes back the following Saturday, and she brings her adult sister. Ellie sees them from the barn door, two women climbing out of that same dusty Subaru, Patricia in her weekend fleece and her sister standing with both arms crossed tight against her chest like she's holding herself together. The sister's name is Donna. She's maybe 30, and she has the look of someone who hasn't been outside in a long time. Pale, tight jaw, eyes scanning the property like it might bite her. Ellie walks over, her scuffed brown boots leaving tracks in the morning dew, that brass-capped journal spine just visible at the opening of her olive-green canvas jacket. She doesn't ask questions. She says, "The gray mare in the second paddock likes company. Her name is Blackstone. Don't ask me why, that's what she came with." No riding. Ellie doesn't allow it. These animals are still in protocol, the 90-day window where their weight comes back, where the cortisol drops, where they learn that a hand reaching toward them doesn't mean pain. You don't put a saddle on a horse that spent 3 years being starved in a muddy pen. You walk with them. You brush them. You stand there and breathe. That's what Donna does. She stands in the pasture with Blackstone for 45 minutes. Doesn't speak. The mare drops her head low, nose nearly touching the grass, and breathes. Long, slow exhales that Ellie can hear from the fence rail. Donna's crossed arms eventually fall to her sides. Patricia comes back the next Saturday, then the Saturday after. Then she brings a friend named Ruth. They don't ride. They groom. They walk. They stand in the pasture while the rehabilitated horses drift toward them like iron filings toward a magnet, slow and unhurried. And then Patricia says something at the gate one evening that stops Ellie cold. She says, "Donna slept 8 hours Thursday night. First time in 2 years. She told me it started the night after she met Blackstone." Ellie doesn't respond right away. She stands there with one hand resting on the fence rail, gray-green eyes narrowed, that faint scattering of freckles catching the last of the sun. She nods, says, "Good." One word. A closed door. But she thinks about it all week. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Ellie hadn't planned this part. The horses were the project. The land was the project. The slow, grinding math of organic matter and bales per acre and hay costs, that was the war she'd signed up to fight. The people showing up at her gate? That wasn't in the journal. Dale never wrote a single sentence about visitors. His philosophy was soil and patience and the settling, and Ellie had built her entire operation around those 3 pillars. But now something else was growing, something she hadn't planted, and she didn't have a row for it in her notebook. Here's what she starts to notice. The horses that have completed the 90-day protocol, the ones past the worst of it, calm and socialized, coats filled in, ribs no longer showing, they behave differently around stressed visitors than they behave around Ellie. Around Ellie, they're steady, familiar. They nicker when she approaches. They follow her along the fence line. They accept grooming like it's routine. Around Donna, around Ruth, around the tense, quiet people who show up with Patricia on Saturdays, these same horses do something else entirely. They approach slowly. They lower their heads. They breathe, deliberately, audibly, into the visitor's open hands. And the visitor's shoulders drop, their breathing slows, their jaws unclench. Ellie drives to the county library on a Tuesday and checks out a book about equine-assisted interaction. She reads it at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee going cold beside her. And there it is. What Dale's journal calls the settling, that phrase she's read 40 times, the one he underlined twice and circled once, is a documented physiological phenomenon. Horses synchronize their breathing and heart rate with nearby humans. They mirror the autonomic nervous system. A calm horse standing close to an anxious person doesn't just look peaceful. It physically pulls that person's heart rate down, breath by breath, beat by beat. Dale didn't know the science. He just knew the horses got quiet around him, and he got quiet around the horses, and the land got quiet around both of them. He wrote it like poetry. The researchers wrote it like data. Same damn thing. 60 horses now. The farm is at capacity. Every paddock occupied, every shelter full, every water trough on a twice-daily check. The soil in the oldest grazed pastures, the ones she started rotating 3 years ago, reads 1.5% organic matter. Up from nothing, from dust. She's producing 2 bales per acre against a county average that still hovers at 1.8, and the hay she grows on her own ground now feeds the herd. For the first time, she's nearly self-sufficient on feed. That $800 monthly gap that kept her up at midnight in the barn with a lantern, it's down to $90. 90. The system is almost closed. Word of mouth does what advertising never could. Families start asking to visit. They hear about it from Patricia, from Donna, from Ruth. They show up at the gate on weekday mornings, on Sunday afternoons. Ellie doesn't charge. It doesn't occur to her to charge. These people aren't customers, they're just here. But 14 families are now on an informal schedule, and the county notices. Craig Fenwick pulls up in his county vehicle on a Wednesday afternoon. No brochures this time. His pressed khaki slacks are still creased sharp enough to cut bread, his polished tan loafers still absurd on a gravel drive, that beige clipboard still tucked against his hip. But there's a new form on it. "Ellie," he says, chin tilted slightly upward, that little dimple showing because he's smiling, and the smile is the worst part. "I'm hearing you've got families coming through here on a regular basis. That's wonderful, really. But we need to talk about whether this constitutes a commercial operation. Zoning says agricultural. If you're providing a service, even a free one, to the public, that's a different classification, different permits, different liability structure. You understand." The man came out here to threaten her with paperwork because people are petting her horses. Let that sink in. Ellie looks at him with those gray-green eyes. "Nobody's paid me a dime, Craig." He leaves. But the clipboard has a new form on it, and they both know he'll be back. That night, Ellie pins a hand-drawn map of the farm to the barn wall, with 60 horses marked by name and paddock, and beneath it, a list of 14 families who have asked to visit. She charges nothing yet, but she circles the number 14 and writes beside it, "Dale, what do I do with this?" The answer to Ellie's question comes not from the journal, but from June Harrelson, who walks over one Tuesday morning and says, "You know people would pay for this." Just like that. No preamble, no apology for 2 years of silence, no awkward small talk at the fence line. June stands there in her maroon flannel and gray rubber muck boots, yellow leather gloves tucked into her back pocket, that small mole on her right cheekbone catching the morning light, and she says it like she's reporting the weather. Ellie looks up from the water trough she's scrubbing. Dark chestnut hair pulled back in its low ponytail, flyaway strands stuck to her temples with sweat. Gray-green eyes steady. "Pay for what, exactly?" "The visits, the families. I've been watching them come and go for months now, Saturdays, Sundays, sometimes Wednesdays. Those people drive 40 minutes each way. They bring their own lunch. They stay 3 hours. June folds her arms. You're feeding 60 horses on a shoestring and charging nothing. That's not generosity, Ellie. That's a slow way to go broke. And here's the thing June doesn't say, but Ellie hears anyway. June has watched the Marsden pastures turn from pale, exhausted dirt to dark, living soil, while her own fields stayed flat and stubborn across the road. She's watched the manure compost cycle do what no bag of synthetic nitrogen could do. She's watched families kneel in the grass beside horses that 6 months ago wouldn't let a human within arm's reach. June Harrelson is not a woman who admits she was wrong. She's a woman who shows up with an offer. I can help you build a parking area at the front gate. Gravel and timbers. Keep the cars off your pasture. Ellie wipes her hands on her dark brown work pants, extends one. They shake. No speech, no ceremony, just a grip and a nod, and 2 women who understand what the handshake replaces. Within a week, Ellie structures the program. $45 per 90-minute session. Families of up to 4 adults. No riding, she's firm on that. This isn't a trail ride operation, and these aren't trail horses. Each session is a guided walk and groom with a rehabilitated horse. Families learn to approach, to read the ears and the eyes, to brush along the grain of the coat, to stand quiet and let the animal decide when contact happens. She doesn't advertise, doesn't take out a newspaper listing. She tells the 14 families already coming. That's it. Within a month, she has 38 enrolled. Within 2 months, a waiting list of 40. $45 doesn't sound like much, but multiply it. 38 families visiting twice a month, that's 76 sessions. 76 times 45 is $3,420. Monthly. Meanwhile, the pastures that Dale's composting system rebuilt now produce surplus hay. Feed costs that used to gut her have dropped to $400 a month. Farrier visits run another $200. She nets roughly $2,800 a month. The first profit the Marsden farm has seen in 11 years. She walks into the farm supply store in town, picks out a proper set of farrier tools, rasp, nippers, hoof knife, clinch cutter, the whole kit, and pays cash. Lays the bills on the counter one at a time. The system is working. Until it isn't. A newly arrived horse called Warrant, a hot-tempered 5-year-old chestnut stallion straight off a failed racing syndicate, goes after another horse in the paddock on a Thursday afternoon. Teeth and hooves. Warrant catches a quiet bay mare named Pocket on the left shoulder, opens a gash that takes 11 stitches from the vet. Blood on the grass. Ellie, standing there with her heart hammering, holding Pocket's halter, watching the vet work. Her pairing protocol failed. She paired Warrant too early. 2 weeks in a solo paddock, then introduction to a calm partner. That's what the protocol said. But Warrant had never been around other horses outside a starting gate. 2 weeks wasn't enough. He didn't know how to be a horse around horses. That night, Ellie sits at the kitchen table with the brass-capped leather journal open in front of her. She redesigns the intake from scratch. Horses with no socialization history, track horses, stall-kept horses, horses that spent their lives in isolation, get an extended solo paddock phase. 4 weeks instead of 2. No exceptions. During those 4 weeks, she introduces scent contact through shared fence lines, then visual contact with a calm anchor horse in an adjacent paddock, then supervised nose-to-nose meetings before any shared space. The fix becomes permanent protocol. She writes it into her own notebook in handwriting that's starting to look a lot like Dale's. And then, of course, Fenwick comes back. Have you ever wagered everything on an idea no one else believed in? Built something from nothing on land everyone told you to sell, and then watched a man with a clipboard try to take it from you with a zoning code? Craig Fenwick walks onto the Marsden property with a county zoning inspector at his side. Sandy blonde hair neatly parted, light blue Oxford shirt tucked tight, polished tan loafers picking their way around the mud like it might stain his dignity. That birthmark on the right side of his neck just above the collar. That little dimple on his left cheek when he smiles. He's smiling now. Miss Marsden, we have reason to believe this property is operating as a commercial recreation facility without proper classification. That would require a compliance retrofit, roughly $12,000. He tilts that chin up. I'd hate for you to lose all this over paperwork. $12,000. Enough to gutter. Enough to bury the program before it breathes. Ellie disappears into the farmhouse, comes back with a folder. Agricultural license, current. Equine rehabilitation records, 60 horses, documented intake to placement. And a letter. Not from Fenwick's county office, from the State Agricultural Extension Board, recognizing animal-assisted agricultural therapy as a qualifying farm use under the existing agricultural designation. She hands the folder to the zoning inspector. Not to Fenwick. To the inspector. Those are my terms. Fenwick's clipboard has nothing left to add. He stands there in his polished loafers, mouth slightly open, and for the first time in this whole story, he has absolutely nothing to say. The inspector hands the folder back to Ellie, nods once, and walks to his truck. Ellie mails her first quarterly report to the State Agricultural Board. 60 horses rehabilitated, 38 families enrolled in the visiting program at $45 per session, gross revenue of $6,840 in 3 months, and a waiting list of 40 families she can't yet accommodate. The waiting list hits 200 families in Ellie's 3rd year of the visiting program, and she hasn't added a single acre. Not one. Same 140 acres, same fence posts Dale sank decades ago, same creek cutting through the southeast corner where the willows lean heavy in July, and 200 families, 200, sitting on a piece of paper hoping for a slot to open up so they can spend $45 to walk through a pasture with a horse that nobody wanted 3 years prior. So how does a woman with a waiting list that long resist the obvious move? You buy more land. That's what anyone with half a business brain would tell you. Expand, scale, leverage, borrow against the revenue, acquire the adjacent 40 from the Pettijohn estate, double the herd, double the sessions, double the money. Ellie doesn't do any of that. She does something quieter, something that looks, from the outside, like she's standing still, which is exactly the kind of move that drove her neighbors crazy in the first place. She increases session frequency. Mondays through Saturdays now, dawn and afternoon blocks. She trains 2 local women, both of them former visitors themselves, both of them women who'd walked those pastures with their own families and come back asking if there was anything they could do to help. She trains them as guides, pays them $12 an hour, gives them Dale's old field notebook photocopied and spiral bound, and walks beside them for 6 weeks until they can read a horse's breathing the way she can, until they know when Ledger wants space and when he's leaning into contact. Then she staggers the schedule so the horses get adequate rest between sessions. No animal works more than 4 hours in a day. No paddock hosts visitors more than 3 days running before it rotates back to grazing rest. She caps enrollment at 80 active families. 80. That's it. The waiting list keeps growing, and Ellie lets it grow. She doesn't apologize for the number. She doesn't explain it. When someone calls asking to jump the line, she says the same 5 words every time. 80 is what works here. And that's the end of the conversation. Now here's where it gets interesting. The ripple effect. 3 neighboring farms start adopting elements of Ellie's rotational grazing system. Not horses, cattle. Their own herds, their own fences, their own land. But the bones of the method are hers. Or rather, they're Dale's, channeled through her hands and finally visible enough that people stop pretending they don't see it. June Harrelson is the first. Steel gray hair tucked behind her ears, muck boots planted in her own south pasture, a pair of worn yellow leather work gloves tucked into her back pocket like always. June doesn't ask permission. She just starts moving her cattle on a 21-day rotation, lets the clover come back between passes, stops mowing the fence lines. 1 season later, her pasture organic matter rises from 1.2% to 1.9%. That's a massive jump. In 1 season, on land that had been conventionally grazed for 40 years. Nobody in the county is talking about Ellie anymore with a joke attached. A journalist from the Lexington Herald-Leader drives out on a Tuesday in late September. Ellie gives her 20 minutes and a walk through the pastures. That's it. 20 minutes. No pitch, no prepared speech, no media kit. Just a woman in a faded olive-green canvas jacket and scuffed brown boots walking a reporter through knee-high grass and letting the land speak for itself. The article runs the following Sunday with a photo of Ledger, 18 years old now, gray around the muzzle, still steady as a church floor, standing in that grass beside a family of 4. The headline reads, "The horses nobody wanted built the farm everyone's watching." Ellie doesn't frame the article. She tucks it inside Dale's journal between pages 46 and 47, right next to a pencil sketch of a clover root system he'd drawn sometime in 1979. The brass-capped spine of that little leather book barely closes around all the things she's folded into it over the years. Let me tell you what's actually happening in that soil, because this is the part that matters. Every horse on Ellie's land drops roughly 50 pounds of manure a day. Across a herd rotating through 140 acres, that translates to approximately 11 pounds of nitrogen deposited per acre annually. Not dumped in one spot, spread by movement, by hooves, by the natural drift of animals grazing in arcs across a paddock. Those same hooves break the surface crust with every step. Mechanical aeration. No machine, no diesel, no compaction from tractor tires. Just 1,200 pounds of animal pressing through dried topsoil and opening it to air and water. Then the clover moves in. White Dutch clover, mostly, threading through the grass where sunlight reaches the soil after grazing. Its root nodules fix atmospheric nitrogen at roughly 80 pounds per acre per year. Combined with the manure deposits, Ellie's system matches the fertility output of 200 pounds of synthetic 10-10-10 fertilizer per acre. At 0 chemical cost. 0. The land doesn't need a whip. It needs a meal. Dale wrote that. Ellie proved it. A soil scientist named Dr. Carolyn Phelps drives out from the University of Kentucky with a graduate student and an auger. They take 40 core samples across every paddock, oldest grazed to newest, creekside to hilltop. The results come back 8 weeks later, and Phelps calls Ellie on a Thursday evening. The oldest grazed fields show 2.8% organic matter, above the county average, for the first time in recorded history on Marsden land. Phelps publishes the data, a peer-reviewed paper, 40 core samples, 7 years of rotation records Ellie kept in spiral notebooks stacked on the kitchen shelf. The paper documents the Marsden farm's topsoil recovery, 0.4% to 2.8% organic matter in 7 years, using only equine rotational grazing. And then the phone starts ringing from places Ellie has never heard of. Oregon, Mississippi, Vermont. A voicemail from a woman in the Willamette Valley, an email forwarded through the university from a cattle operation outside Natchez. One more thing arrives in the mail that week. A form letter from the County Agricultural Extension Office, Fenwick's office, congratulating the Marsden farm on its innovative agricultural practice. Printed on cream letterhead. No personal signature, just a rubber-stamped name. Ellie reads it at the kitchen table, her gray-green eyes steady, the faint freckles across her nose catching the last of the afternoon light. She sets the letter down without comment, doesn't fold it, doesn't keep it, just sets it on the table like a leaf that blew in through an open window. A university soil scientist publishes a paper documenting the Marsden farm's topsoil recovery, 0.4% to 2.8% organic matter in 7 years using only equine rotational grazing, and the phone starts ringing from places Ellie has never heard of. 22 years after Ellie unloaded those first 8 horses, the Marsden farm is 140 acres of the darkest topsoil in Mercer County. And that phone kept ringing. It rang from agricultural colleges in Vermont and livestock rehabilitation outfits in Montana, and a woman in New Zealand who'd read that university paper and wanted to know if equine composting really could rebuild depleted clay soils in under a decade. Ellie answered every call the same way, short, plain, practical. She told them what worked, she told them what failed first. She gave them numbers. Then she hung up and went back to the barn. She's in her mid-50s now. The chestnut hair has faded to a streaked silver brown, still pulled back in that same low ponytail, flyaway strands along the temples catching the light the way they always have. The olive canvas jacket is worn soft at the elbows and cuffs, the brass-capped spine of Dale's journal still visible at the inner pocket opening. Her forearms are ropey and tan. The freckles across the bridge of her nose have deepened. The gray-green eyes are the same, steady, deep-set, unhurried. She walks the fence line every morning with the same deliberate, forward-leaning stride she had at 24. Except now, every post she touches is one she set herself. The numbers tell the story better than I can. Over 2 decades, this farm has rehabilitated more than 400 horses. The visiting program has served over 3,000 families. She still charges $45 a session. She still doesn't advertise. The waiting list right now, today, is 200 families long. Pull a soil core anywhere on this property and you'll read 3.4% organic matter. Remember where that started. 0.4%. Palatate, calcium-locked dust that wouldn't hold a rainstorm for 6 hours. Now, the pastures produce 2.6 bales per acre against a county average of 1.8. The farm hasn't purchased outside feed in 14 years. Everything the horses eat grows under their own feet, fertilized by their own manure, cycled through the rotational system Dale sketched in that journal before Ellie was born. And the creek, that silted brown trickle that ran through the south pasture when she inherited the place, runs clear. For the first time in anyone's memory, Ellie can see the gravel bottom. She stood there one October morning, the water barely ankle-deep, and watched a crawdad move sideways across clean stone. She didn't say anything. She just watched it walk. Ledger is still alive. 34 years old, gray-muzzled, slow through the hips, her coat still thick and warm every winter. She stands in the near paddock most days, the herd's anchor, the herd every other horse still orients toward. Families who visited a decade ago drive back with their grown sons and daughters just to see her. They bring carrots. They bring photographs of themselves standing beside her when they were younger, thinner, carrying different weight. Ellie brushes Ledger every morning before anything else on the farm gets done. It takes longer now. The old mare leans into the bristles, shifts her weight carefully, breathes slow. but it's the first task of every day. It has been for 22 years. Craig Fenwick retired from the extension office in 2009. Nobody threw him a party. He moved to a subdivision outside Lexington, and the last anyone heard, he was selling vinyl siding. The beige clipboard, the polished tan loafers, the chin tilted slightly upward, all of it packed into a sedan and driven away from a county that had quietly stopped listening to him years before he left. He wasn't defeated. He was made irrelevant. The system worked, and he simply had nothing left to offer. June Harrelson still farms the property next door. Steel gray hair tucked behind her ears, yellow leather gloves in her back pocket, that same rolling, unhurried gait. She runs a modified version of Ellie's rotational grazing on her own cattle operation now. Never asked permission, never announced it, just started doing it. The mole on her right cheekbone catches the light when she nods across the fence at Ellie in the mornings, and that nod carries more than any apology ever could. Then Tess arrives. She's 22. Fair pink skin, gray-green eyes, same slim, wiry build. Dale's blood showing up 2 generations down the line. She pulls up in a truck that needs a muffler, carrying 1 bag and no plan beyond the phone call she made 3 weeks earlier. Ellie meets her at the porch. They don't hug. They stand there a moment, sizing each other up the way 2 people do when they both know what's about to be asked. Ellie reaches into the inner pocket of the olive jacket and pulls out 2 things. The first is Dale's brass-capped leather journal, the spine cracked, the pages soft from decades of handling. The second is Ellie's own notebook, smaller, spiral-bound, filled with her handwriting, her numbers, her failures, her fixes. She holds them both out. Tess takes them. And Ellie says it. The same words Dale wrote on the first page. The same words she read at that kitchen table when she was 24 and terrified, and the whole county thought she was a fool. The same words she's spoken exactly 3 times in her life when the moment required it. Waste is just a system the world hasn't finished building. 5 words that landed like a closed door. Have you ever held something in your hands that was heavier than its weight? A tool that still carried the warmth of the person who used it last? That's what Tess is holding now. Not a book, a philosophy with dirt under its fingernails. The young woman opens the journal, reads the first line in Dale's handwriting. Waste is just a system the world hasn't finished building, and walks out to the barn where 60 horses stand quiet in the evening light, the land dark and rich beneath their feet, and the silence of people who used to laugh is the only sound left.